The insistent ringing of my phone shattered the peaceful Saturday morning quiet of my farmhouse. I was kneading bread dough, flour dusting my apron, the scent of yeast and warm sunshine filling my kitchen, my sanctuary. I glanced at the caller ID, unknown number. Normally, I'd let it go to voicemail, but a strange premonition, a prickle of unease, made me wipe my hands on a towel and answer. Hello? A voice sickeningly familiar oozed through the receiver, all saccharine sweetness and false bonhomie. Chloe, darling, is that you? It's Brenda Harrison, Liam's mother. Oh, it's been simply too long, hasn't it? My blood ran cold. Brenda Harrison. I hadn't spoken a single word to any member of the Harrison family. Not to Brenda, not to her husband Jim, and certainly not to their son, my ex-fiancé. Liam, in the agonizing year since Liam had unceremoniously, brutally, dumped me via a 3-line text message. Just weeks, mere weeks, before our own meticulously planned, eagerly anticipated wedding. For her? For Sophie? My former best friend? My maid of honor-to-be? The double betrayal had been a soul-crushing cataclysm that had very nearly destroyed me. Brenda, I managed, my voice surprisingly steady, betraying none of the sudden, violent churning in my stomach. What do you want? Oh, just calling with some wonderful, exciting news. Dear. Brenda trilled, her voice dripping with a forced, almost manic cheerfulness. Liam and our darling Sophie are getting married. Next month? Isn't it just marvelous? Such a whirlwind romance, those two. Positively destined. I remained silent, the flour on my hands suddenly feeling like grit, the sunlit kitchen feeling cold, oppressive. Brenda, clearly misinterpreting my stunned silence as rapt attention, plowed on, her voice taking on a conspiratorial, almost gleeful tone. And darling, we were all thinking, your absolutely lovely farmhouse. Chloe, with those truly gorgeous gardens you've worked so incredibly hard on. Well, it would just be the perfect, most idyllic venue for their special day. So intimate, so personal. So, well, you know what I mean? I was, quite literally, speechless. The audacity, the sheer, unmitigated, breathtaking nerve of it was beyond anything I could have possibly comprehended. They had broken my heart, humiliated me on a public stage, shattered my trust in the two people I had loved most in the world. And now, they had the unmitigated gall, the colossal effrontery, to expect me, to demand, that I host the wedding of my ex-fiancé to the very woman he had left me for. In my home? The home I had poured my blood, sweat, tears, and every last cent of my inheritance into? Brenda, blissfully, arrogantly unaware of the silent, volcanic fury erupting inside me, continued her monologue. We're thinking a rather small, elegant affair. Of course, nothing too ostentatious. About 150 guests, perhaps? Intimate, but still a proper celebration. And naturally, Chloe, dear, she added, her voice magnanimous, almost queenly. You would be invited. Of course you would. As a special gesture of goodwill. To show there are truly no hard feelings, right? Water under the bridge, as they say. My relationship with Liam Harrison had spanned 5 years, from the heady, optimistic days of college sweethearts to the more grounded, if equally hopeful, reality of planning a life together. We were, I had believed, solid, unshakable. We'd even bought the dilapidated, centuries-old farmhouse together, a shared dream, a tangible symbol of our future. Or so I had thought. In reality, I had been the one with the vision, the architectural training, the practical skills to see beyond the crumbling walls and overgrown fields. And I had been the one to pour the entirety of my modest inheritance from my beloved grandmother into the substantial down payment and the initial, critical renovations. Liam's contribution had been largely enthusiastic moral support. Then, just 6 short weeks before our own wedding day, the day I had dreamed of since I was a little girl, the text message had arrived. Cold, curt, cowardly. Chloe, it's Rai. Can't do this. It's over. Met someone else. Don't try to call. No explanation. No face-to-face conversation. No shred of human decency. Just gone. Vanished from my life like a puff of smoke, leaving behind a crater of devastation and a mountain of non-refundable deposits. Days later, through the insidious grapevine of mutual acquaintances and a particularly cruel, ill-timed social media post, I discovered the identity of the someone else. Sophie, my childhood best friend, my confidant, my maid of honor to be, the woman who had helped me choose my wedding dress, who had listened to my anxieties, who had sworn she would always be there for me. The double betrayal by my fiancé, the man I was supposed to marry, and by my best friend, the sister of my heart, was a soul-crushing, almost unbearable agony. It had ripped my world apart, leaving me gasping for air in the wreckage. The aftermath had been a blur of humiliation, of shame, of a grief so profound it felt physical. Canceling our wedding, notifying stunned guests, dealing with vendors demanding payment for services no longer required. The pitying looks from acquaintances, the hushed, speculative whispers, the thinly veiled judgments. Liam, in a rare moment of what I suspect was guilt-fueled expediency rather than actual remorse, had quickly, almost eagerly, signed over his minimal, almost non-existent, legal share of the farmhouse to me. In exchange, I had agreed not to pursue him for his half of the substantial wedding deposit losses. He just wanted a clean break, a quick, uncomplicated escape into his shiny new life with Sophie, unburdened by the messy emotional debris he had left in his wake. His parents, Brenda and Jim Harrison, had, throughout our 5-year relationship, always adored me. Or so I had foolishly, naively believed. They had treated me like a daughter, showering me with affection, including me in all their family traditions, constantly telling me how lucky Liam was to have found me. But after the breakup, after Liam's shocking, cruel defection, their affections had immediately, seamlessly, and with a chilling alacrity, transferred to Sophie. She was now the darling girl, the perfect match for their precious son. Not a single word of apology, not a whisper of concern or sympathy for me, had come from any member of the Harrison family, just a deafening, wounding silence, swiftly followed by a barrage of gleeful, almost triumphant, social media posts from Brenda, chronicling Liam and Sophie's whirlwind romance, their meant-to-be love story, how perfectly suited they were for each other, how radiantly happy they both looked. Each post, each carefully curated image, had been another small, sharp stab to my already bleeding heart. I even remembered, with a sudden sickening clarity, a seemingly innocuous comment Brenda had made months before the breakup, as we'd been walking through the overgrown gardens of the farmhouse, discussing renovation plans. "This old place has such wonderful potential. Chloe," she'd said, her gaze sweeping possessively over the property. "Once Liam and Sophie eventually have a few children, it'll make a truly wonderful family home for them, won't it?" At the time, I'd dismissed it as a strange, slightly tactless slip of the tongue. Now, in retrospect, it felt chillingly prescient. The Harrisons, I realized with a dawning horror, had always seen the farmhouse, the property I had primarily funded, the vision I had painstakingly brought to life, as an extension of their family's future, with or without me. I had merely been a temporary caretaker, a convenient placeholder. Over the past agonizing year, I had poured every ounce of my grief, my anger, my shattered pride, into finishing the farmhouse. It had become my sanctuary, my refuge, my salvation. It was a tangible testament to my resilience, my skill, my hard-won independence. Every nail I hammered, every floorboard I sanded, every flower I planted in those once neglected gardens had been an act of defiance, an act of reclaiming my life, my identity, my future from the ashes of their betrayal. I'd even started a small, surprisingly successful architectural design business from my home office, specializing in sustainable, soulful renovations of historic properties, much like my own. The farmhouse was not just my home anymore. It was my portfolio, my calling card, my pride and joy, a symbol of my ability to create beauty and strength out of ruin. The thought of Liam and Sophie, and the smug, entitled, utterly clueless Harrisons, desecrating this sacred space, this monument to my survival, with their tainted wedding, their fraudulent celebration of a love built on lies and betrayal, was a violation almost too profound, too grotesque, to contemplate. After the initial, paralyzing shock of Brenda's outrageous phone call, I managed to rally, to find my voice. "Absolutely not, Brenda," I said, my tone curt, icy, final. "That is completely, unequivocally out of the question." And I hung up, my hand trembling, my heart pounding a furious rhythm against my ribs. But, of course, it didn't end there. The Harrisons, it seemed, were not accustomed to taking no for an answer, especially not from someone they clearly still considered a mere peripheral player in their grand family drama. They launched a full-scale campaign of persuasion, of manipulation, of emotional blackmail. Texts from Emily, Liam's younger, equally entitled sister, began to arrive, each one dripping with a saccharine, cloying sweetness. "Oh, Chloe, please don't be so bitter. It's not attractive. It would just mean so very much to Mom and Dad, to all of us. If you'd just let Liam and Sophie have their special day at the farmhouse, it's the least you could do. Really." Then came a formal, almost comically self-important email from Jim Harrison, Liam's father. "Chloe, my dear, Brenda and I have always thought of you as part of our family. You know that. Surely, after all this time, you can find it in your heart to do this one small, simple thing for Liam's happiness, for the future of our family. It would be a wonderful gesture of forgiveness and healing." And then, the pièce de résistance, a call from Liam himself. His voice, once so beloved, so familiar. The sound that used to make my heart sing, now made my stomach churn with a mixture of nausea and contempt. He sounded awkward, a little sheepish, perhaps, but ultimately, predictably, deeply entitled. "Look, Chloe," he began, his tone attempting a casual, friendly intimacy that was utterly unwarranted. I know things ended badly between us. I messed up. Okay? But Mom, she's really got her heart set on having the wedding at the farmhouse. It's just, well, it's perfect for us. For Sophie and me. And honestly, Chloe, it would really smooth things over with both our families. You know? Show everyone there are no hard feelings. A fresh start, right? Even Sophie, my former best friend, the Benedict Arnold of my personal life, had the audacity to send me a saccharine, manipulative text message filled with emojis and false sentiment. "Chloe, I know we haven't talked in ages, and I am so incredibly sorry for any hurt I might have caused, truly. But your farmhouse? Oh my God, it's just my absolute dream wedding venue. It would be like a real-life fairy tale. Please, pretty please, with a cherry on top? For old time's sake, it would mean the world to me. And to Liam. The sheer, unadulterated, breathtaking audacity of it all was truly astounding. A few days later, I was working in my vegetable garden, wrestling with a particularly stubborn patch of weeds, when I saw a familiar, gleaming black SUV slow down on the quiet country road that ran past my property. It was Brenda and Jim Harrison, and with them, in the passenger seat, was a woman I didn't recognize. A sharp-featured, impeccably dressed woman who was pointing and gesturing animatedly towards my house, my gardens, my fields. They were clearly, brazenly, scouting out the location, as if my firm, unequivocal refusal had been merely a polite suggestion, a minor obstacle to be overcome with a little persistence. Later that same afternoon, I received a call from Mrs. Peterson, a kind, elderly woman who ran a well-respected local catering business, a woman I knew and liked. "Chloe, dear," she said, her voice puzzled. "I just had a very strange inquiry. A Mrs. Brenda Harrison called me, quite insistently, asking about my availability to cater a wedding for approximately 150 guests at your farmhouse next month. She said you were all in enthusiastic agreement and were just in the process of working out the final details. I told her I was rather surprised, as I hadn't heard anything from you, and I thought I'd better check with you first before I committed to anything." The local gossip mill, predictably, began to churn. Word started to spread like wildfire through our small, interconnected rural town. People were whispering, their voices a mixture of shock, pity, and a perverse, almost gleeful curiosity. "Did you hear? Liam Harrison and that Sophie girl? They're getting married at Chloe Miller's old place. Can you imagine? So terribly awkward." The Harrisons, it seemed, were actively, deliberately telling people that the wedding at my farmhouse was a done deal, painting me as either incredibly magnanimous and forgiving, or, more likely, as a pathetic, spineless pushover who couldn't say no. This public assumption, this brazen hijacking of my home, my life, my narrative, was infuriating. It was a public humiliation by proxy. I was beyond angry. I was incandescent. My fury was a cold, hard, diamond-sharp thing, honed by a year of pain, betrayal, and a slow, arduous rebuilding. They hadn't just broken my heart. They had shattered my trust, my faith in friendship, my carefully constructed vision of the future. And now, after all that, after I had painstakingly, almost literally, rebuilt my life, my home, from the ashes of their destructive, selfish betrayal, they had the unmitigated, galling, almost sociopathic nerve to demand that I host their grotesque celebration of that very betrayal? In my sanctuary? As if my pain, my property, my very being were just some minor, insignificant inconvenience to their grandiose, self-absorbed desires. This wasn't just about a wedding venue anymore. This was about power, about control, about entitlement, about them trying to systematically erase me, to rewrite our shared history, to claim what was rightfully, unequivocally mine, not just the physical structure of the house, the land it stood on, but my dignity, my peace of mind, my hard-won sense of self. They wanted to parade their perfect love story, their fairy tale romance, on the very ground where they had so callously, so brutally, shattered mine. A cold, steely, unshakable resolve formed within me. They wanted a spectacle? Oh, I would give them a spectacle, but it would be on my terms. And it certainly wouldn't be the one they were so arrogantly, so confidently, expecting. A few days later, after a series of increasingly insistent, almost harassing calls and texts from Brenda, I called her back. My voice, when I spoke, was deliberately sweet, almost conciliatory. A tone I knew would disarm her, lull her into a false sense of security. "Brenda, dear," I began, "I've had some time to think things over, and, well, perhaps you're right. Perhaps it is time to let bygones be bygones, to move forward. About the farmhouse for Liam and Sophie's wedding. Brenda was predictably ecstatic. She practically crowed with triumph, gushing about how she knew I would see sense, how she knew I would do the right Christian thing, how this was all for the best, for everyone involved. There are just a few small conditions. Brenda, I said, my voice still honey-sweet. Minor things, really? Details. But I'd like to discuss them in person, with you and Jim, and of course with Liam and Sophie, and perhaps with your wedding planner. If you've engaged one already, it would be best if we could all meet at my house. Say, next Saturday afternoon. We can walk the grounds together, discuss logistics, make sure everything is just perfect for their special day. The Harrisons, smelling an easy, decisive victory, already envisioning their perfect stolen wedding, readily, almost eagerly, agreed. I spent the following week preparing, not for a wedding, but for a reckoning. I contacted my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sarah Chen, and had her draw up a very specific, very binding document. I also, very discreetly, invited a few key, carefully chosen people for coffee and a chat at my farmhouse that same Saturday afternoon, at a time that would, by sheer coincidence, of course, overlap with the Harrisons' scheduled visit. Mrs. Peterson, the caterer, who had already proven her discretion and her loyalty, old Mr. Henderson, a kind, respected town elder who had helped me with the initial land purchase and had known and loved my grandmother, and, for good measure, a sharp, insightful journalist friend from my college days, Megan, who now wrote a popular lifestyle column for a regional magazine. Saturday arrived, a glorious, crisp autumn day, the trees ablaze with color. The Harrisons, accompanied by Liam, a visibly uncomfortable Sophie, and their smug, overly effusive wedding planner. A woman named Penelope Plum arrived at my farmhouse precisely on time, brimming with plans, bursting with an almost unbearable, self-satisfied entitlement. I greeted them at the door with a calm, enigmatic smile, a smile that gave nothing away. I led them on a leisurely tour of my beloved gardens, listening with an almost preternatural patience as they chattered excitedly, already rearranging my life, my space, to suit their vision, discussing tent placements on my newly seeded lawn, envisioning elaborate floral arrangements cascading from my ancient apple trees, pointing out potential backdrops for their unforgettable wedding photos. We gathered, eventually, on the large, beautiful, sun-drenched stone patio I had designed and built myself, the one overlooking the rolling hills and the distant, shimmering river. Just as Penelope Plum was unfurling a massive, ridiculously detailed blueprint of their wedding, to be held on my property, my coffee guests began to arrive, as prearranged, Mrs. Peterson, Mr. Henderson, and my journalist friend. Megan greeted me warmly, their expressions carefully neutral as they were introduced to the Harrison contingent, who looked momentarily disconcerted, then vaguely annoyed by these unexpected, uninvited additions to their planning session. "Thank you all for coming," I said, turning to the Harrisons, my voice clear, steady, carrying easily in the crisp autumn air. Now, about those conditions I mentioned, for potentially hosting Liam and Sophie's wedding here at my home. I paused, letting the silence stretch. Then, with a calm, deliberate precision, I laid them out, my voice like ice, each word a carefully aimed dart. Condition number 1, I began, my gaze locking with Brenda's. A non-refundable venue rental fee of $50,000, payable in full, in advance. That sum, as you may or may not recall, Brenda, is roughly equivalent to the non-refundable deposits I personally lost when Liam, your son, canceled our wedding with a 3-line text message, plus a modest sum for the considerable emotional distress and public humiliation I endured as a direct result of his actions. Condition number 2, I continued, shifting my gaze to Jim Harrison. A legally binding contract, to be drawn up by my lawyer, Ms. Sarah Chen, indemnifying me against any and all damages to my property, my land, or my reputation, and a further $20,000 security deposit, also non-refundable if any of my property is damaged or any of the terms of the contract are breached in any way. Condition number 3, I said, my eyes now settling on Liam, who was looking increasingly pale and uncomfortable. A full, public, written apology from you, Liam Harrison, for the callous, cowardly, and deeply hurtful manner of our breakup, to be published, at your expense, in the Sunday edition of the local newspaper, the Willow Creek Chronicle, and I turned to Sophie, who was now openly gaping at me, her pretty face a mask of disbelief. A separate, similar public apology from you, Sophie, for your profound betrayal of our lifelong friendship and your active, willing participation in the destruction of my engagement. Then, the bombshell. Condition number 4, I announced, my voice unwavering, full and immediate repayment, with accrued interest at the current market rate, of the $75,000 of inheritance money from my late grandmother, Eleanor, that I personally invested as the primary down payment and for the initial, critical renovation costs for this property. A property which Liam, during our relationship, benefited from extensively, but never contributed to in any significant or equitable financial manner, since he so callously, so easily, discarded our shared future, our shared dreams. I believe it is only right and just that I recoup my initial and significantly larger capital investment before this property is used, in any way, to launch his new, supposedly idyllic future with someone else. And finally, the coup de grace. And condition number 5, I said, my gaze sweeping over all of them, cold, hard, and utterly implacable. I alone, reserve the absolute right to personally approve the final guest list for any event held on my property. And just to be perfectly crystal clear, Brenda, Jim. I looked directly, unblinkingly, at Liam's stunned, sputtering parents. You, unfortunately, will not be on it. After your appalling lack of empathy, your consistent emotional cruelty, and your current truly breathtaking display of unmitigated entitlement, your presence would most certainly not be welcome in my home, under any circumstances, ever again. Brenda gasped, a strangled, choking sound, her face turning a furious, alarming shade of puce. This is an outrage, an absolute travesty. You can't be serious, you wouldn't dare. Liam stammered, his voice cracking. Chloe, this is completely insane. You're just being vindictive, spiteful. Sophie, predictably, burst into loud, theatrical tears. But I just wanted a pretty wedding, she wailed, as if that somehow excused or mitigated their appalling behavior. Oh, I'm perfectly serious, I replied, my voice calm, almost serene now. Deadly serious. You wanted to use my home. This home that I literally built from the ashes of my own pain and your collective resilience, as a pretty convenient backdrop for your so-called fairy tale. You assumed my forgiveness. You assumed my compliance. You assumed my continued silence. You were, all of you, profoundly, disastrously, wrong. I turned then to my assembled coffee guests, who had been listening to the entire exchange with a mixture of stunned disbelief and, in Mr. Henderson's case, a dawning, almost imperceptible twinkle of approval in his wise old eyes. Mrs. Peterson, Mr. Henderson, Megan, I said, my voice clear and strong. I believe you've all now heard the Harrisons' rather unique wedding venue request, and my entirely reasonable, if somewhat unexpected, conditions. Perhaps now you can all understand why I felt it necessary, for my own protection, to have objective, respected witnesses to this rather extraordinary conversation. The Harrisons, Liam, Sophie, and the now very pale, very flustered wedding planner, Penelope Plum, were utterly, completely, gloriously speechless, humiliated, exposed, defeated. They tried to bluster, to argue, to protest, but I stood firm. My lawyers carefully drafted, legally sound list of conditions held firmly in my hand, an unshakable shield, defeated, deflated, their grand, audacious wedding plans for my farmhouse now lying in tatters around their expensive Italian shoes. They turned and practically fled, their earlier arrogance and entitlement replaced by a hasty, ignominious retreat. Mr. Henderson gave me a slow, proud, almost paternal nod of approval. Mrs. Peterson looked at me with a mixture of sympathy and profound admiration. Megan, my journalist friend, was already, I noticed with a grim satisfaction, discreetly scribbling notes in her reporter's pad. The story, carefully, ethically, and with a delicious undercurrent of righteous indignation reported by Megan in her popular lifestyle column, focusing, quite rightly, on the sheer, unbelievable audacity of the Harrisons' request, rather than dwelling on the more salacious personal details of the breakup, created quite a local buzz. Public sympathy, much to my surprise and quiet gratification, was firmly, overwhelmingly, with me. The Harrisons, in a stunning reversal of their usual social standing, were suddenly seen for what they truly were: grasping, insensitive, and breathtakingly entitled. I felt a profound, almost physical sense of peace, of closure. I hadn't stooped to their level, hadn't engaged in petty name-calling or public mudslinging. I had simply met their outrageous, unthinking entitlement with unbreakable boundaries, undeniable logic, and a quiet, unshakable strength they clearly hadn't anticipated. My home was safe, my sanctuary, preserved, my dignity, intact. A few days later, a small, anonymous bouquet of vibrant, cheerful wildflowers arrived on my doorstep, accompanied by a simple, handwritten card. "You go, yo girl. You absolutely go." I suspected, with a warm smile, either Mrs. Peterson or dear old Mr. Henderson. The local notoriety, much to my surprise, brought a wave of positive, unexpected attention to my fledgling architectural design business. People, it seemed, admired my strength, my resilience, my beautiful self-made farmhouse. Tasteful artistic photos of which Megan had, with my permission, thoughtfully included in her widely read article. And, most importantly, my unique, soulful design aesthetic. I received several new, exciting and lucrative commissions in the weeks that followed. My business suddenly, unexpectedly, flourishing. I heard, through the ever-reliable town grapevine, that Liam and Sophie were, indeed, still getting married, but their plans had been significantly, humiliatingly, downscaled. They were apparently having a much smaller, far less glamorous, and reportedly rather joyless wedding at a generic, soulless hotel ballroom on the outskirts of the city, under a distinct, palpable cloud of local disapproval and thinly veiled ridicule. I focused on my work, on my friends, on the quiet, simple, deeply satisfying rhythms of my peaceful life in my beloved farmhouse. I had truly, finally, made it my own, in every sense of the word. The gold I possessed was not monetary, not the kind my parents or the Harrisons so desperately, so blindly, craved. My gold was the richness of my integrity, the value of my talent, the immeasurable worth of my hard-won, fiercely protected peace. They had broken up with me, shattered my world, and then, with an audacity that still boggled my mind, had the unmitigated nerve to demand my home, my sanctuary, for their wedding, as if my heartbreak, my pain, my very existence was just a minor, inconvenient detail in the grand, self-serving narrative of their lives. They had wanted to use my cherished home, The beautiful, strong structure I had literally built from my own tears, my own sweat, my own resilience, as the picturesque stage for their ill-gotten triumph. But they had underestimated me. They had mistaken my quiet, determined resilience for weakness, my preference for peace as an invitation for exploitation. That crisp autumn afternoon, on my sun-drenched stone patio, I hadn't just given them a list of impossible conditions. I had reclaimed my power, my home, my voice, and my story, and that, I realized with a profound, quiet satisfaction, was more deeply, truly satisfying than any I do could ever have been. My farmhouse isn't just wood and stone and carefully chosen antiques. It's a living, breathing testament to survival, to strength, to the enduring power of the human spirit to rebuild, to heal, to create beauty out of ashes. And it will never, ever host the tainted, unwelcome ghosts of their betrayal. It makes you think, doesn't it, about how to respond when people who have deeply wronged you, who have caused you profound pain, have the sheer, unadulterated nerve to demand something further from you. Something that would require you to swallow your pride, your pain, your self-respect? What is the most empowering, the most truly healing response in such a situation? A quiet, firm, dignified refusal, maintaining your boundaries and avoiding any further engagement or drama, thereby denying them any more of your precious time or emotional energy. B, a more strategic, perhaps even public confrontation that not only refuses their demand, but also exposes their behavior, reclaims your narrative, and delivers a measure of long overdue justice, even if it risks creating more immediate conflict or drama. Which path, do you think, offers the greater sense of closure and self-vindication?